Hello and welcome to the NewWorldReview, your source for everything anime and manga, mostly Hunter x Hunter, I do admit. And on that note, more specifically, welcome to the Nencyclopedia, where today we are going to be exploring the varied and nuanced abilities of one Killua Zoldyck. Alright, so as the best boy of Hunter x Hunter, we should all be quite familiar with Killua, who is, quite frankly, one of the most talented Nen users in the entire series, continuously just snowballing within the art form, and it's incredible to look back at just how far he's come in such a ridiculously short amount of time. Before getting into all of that though, one thing we do really need as context for this discussion is his background and family life. As a member of the Zoldyck family, who are the world's most famous celebrity assassins, Killua has been more or less molded to be a perfect Nen candidate right from birth, mostly through a lot of heavily abusive assassin training. Although honestly, the biggest tragedy of Killua's childhood was that his parents would not allow him to press the subscribe button for the NewWorldReview, thus not allowing Killua to receive regular Hunter x Hunter content uploaded straight into his YouTube feed. So you should all be thanking yourselves quite lucky that you can quite comfortably press that button right now. But back to some form of seriousness. Before I use the word abuse, however, I think the more accurate term would be torture. So for example, Killua was exposed to many harmful substances repeatedly in order to build a resistance to them, such as poisons and electricity. And that's quite highly unlikely to be the full extent of it. However, these experiences would prove to be of great benefit to Killua's Nen development. So Killua steps into the series in a very similar position to that of Gon. In terms of raw Nen talent, he is every bit as polished of a gem as Gon, and Killua's aptitude for Nen has been described as 1 in 10 million, just as with Mr. Gon actually, and this is demonstrable at every turn in the series. Not only is Killua comfortably able to keep up with Gon, learning the basic and even advanced principles of Nen with relative ease, but in fact on many occasions Killua quite clearly surpasses Gon because he tends to be a much faster learner, all of which can once again be attributed to his upbringing, which has left Killua with an exceptionally analytical mind, capable of being able to break down Nen theory in a way that Gon could only dream of. And if I had to compare the two, I would say that Killua is the great talent due to that ability, and while the argument could be made that Gon can perhaps bridge this gap with his stunning quantity of aura, that sort of brute force approach really isn't favored in the Nen art form. So Killua is equipped by default with the physical and mental tools that he needs to truly succeed here, which leads into his Affinity of Transmutation. Transmutation being the practice of converting one's aura into a substance of the user's choosing, or more accurately, to mimic the properties of a substance. This is one of, if not the most versatile Nen affinity to be granted, and it's actually an inherited Zoldyck family trait, as all of the white-haired members of the family are transmuters. Meanwhile, the black-haired members are all manipulators, and in the case of old, bald Maha, well, his lack of hair makes him an enhancer, apparently. In any case, this is where Killua's tragic upbringing truly shines, because the substance he would choose to mimic through transmutation would be electricity, something he was rather intimately familiar with due to all of the electrical torture he sustained. And while this might seem fairly basic at face value, according to Bisky, being able to successfully create an element like this at Killua's age is a fairly astonishing feat, and furthermore, so is Killua's innate control of it, as the electricity is obviously one of the more unruly substances. This control actually goes so far that in many cases Killua has been shown capable of varying the damage dealt by this electricity, which can range from mild stinging to a full-on electrocution and burns depending on Mr. Killua's desires. However, as with all Nen-related things, this kind of potency and control does come at a great cost. Firstly, the amount of aura Killua requires to transmute and discharge into electricity is immense, and in many ways out of Killua's control, meaning that he is liable to run out of aura at rather inconvenient times and completely without warning. In addition to this, Killua has another activation requirement, which is that he generally needs to quote-unquote charge himself before engaging in this brand of aura use, which basically means allowing electricity to run through his body, which can be achieved through various means, such as tasing himself or even holding a live wire. And at this stage, it's difficult to say if this practice just makes Killua's transmutation easier because he has the feeling of electricity to work with, or if this is a subconscious Nen restriction that he has placed on himself to create the incredible power he does. And it could also very much be both, because Nen is pretty fun like that. But with all of this in mind, Killua's use of Nen is actually far less versatile than one would initially think. It would be a pretty major mistake to consider Killua in the same sort of vein as your typical electricity or lightning wielders in anime and manga, many of whom just seem to completely embody their element, and if they do have limits, they're quite extreme. In comparison, Killua is forced to think much more tactically about when and how to use his abilities, because any mistake made on his part is going to have a significantly negative effect on his aura reserves. And in that way, it's not so different from how Gon uses his aura actually, concentrating mass quantities into one gigantic attack, which, if it fails, leaves him in a pretty abysmal position. And no, Killua isn't quite that bad because he's much more careful about maintaining aura reserves, which results in attacks like Lightning Palm, for example, which is a simple palm strike infused with electricity upon impact and then swiftly deactivated, thus providing a sharp, potent attack at minimal cost. Although something like this is generally generally not enough to deal with stronger opponents, especially Nen users, so Killua does need to push a little further in that regard. And that would bring us to Thunderbolt, an ability that is fairly self-explanatory, but it sees Killua leap into the air above an opponent and call down a powerful bolt of lightning to strike said opponent. This has problems as well though, because whilst this might seem like quite the deadly strike, it's actually surprisingly weak, and its primary use is for stunning opponents rather than dealing any damage to them. And to be fair, it was quite successful in stunning Yuppie, a Chimera Ant-Royal Guard, so we should not dismiss that ability at all. On the other hand, it was also unable to really inflict any damage on Ramot, even before he became a Nen user. So the great advantage of Thunderbolt is to allow an ally of Killua to attack the opponent while stunned, which was indeed very effective as shown with Gon in the Ramot situation. And this actually brings up something very important, which is that while this series is designed to examine the individual's use of Nen, on many occasions that use is going to be supplementary to someone or something else. And while it might be quite tempting to think of Killua as someone who has developed abilities to become a core combatant, in reality most of what he does is catered towards assisting others, specifically Gon, but also Alico of course. Much of Killua's development in Nen is done parallel to Gon, with Killua studying his friend and carefully catering his Hatsu to augment Gon's. And that's one reason why Killua's Nen use is not at all damage focused, because that's pretty much the only thing that Gon's Nen tends to focus on. And in addition to that, if Killua does need to cause serious damage or even a bit of the old death, then he tends to rely on his assassin skills, using Nen to stun, confuse, disarm, trick, whatever, whilst he engages in his prior mastery of the art of killing. Now, to continue along this path, Killua does have at least one way of attaining more control over his electrical transmutation, which is through the vessel of Delightful Yo-Yos. Delightful Yo-Yos made from a custom alloy that weigh 50 kilograms each, so that's about 110 pounds per yo-yo for all the pounding people out there, assumedly made for Killua by Miliki. Now, this might also be a simple case of the yo-yos taking quite nicely to transmuted electricity, but here it's also good to note that Killua may be invoking another Nen affinity, such as Enhancement, to imbue the yo-yos with already transmuted aura, or to enhance the yo-yos with aura and then transmute the aura. Either way, it would work. There's no real evidence to confirm this one way or the other, but during Greed Island, Killua did engage in extensive training in both enhancement and conjuration, which would obviously be Killua's neighboring affinities on the Nen Ring, so he really is far more skilled than I think even the average fan would give him credit for. Although with that in mind, to be fair, all of Killua's signature abilities are attributed as being pure transmutation. Which brings us to the summit of Killua's Nen use being the Godspeed Hatsu. Now, rather than a more outward use of electricity that we've examined thus far, this is far more of an internal application that exhibits itself in two subforms, the first of which being Whirlwind. Now, the general idea is that in this form, Killua is programming his aura to send electrical signals directly to his muscles, essentially trying and succeeding to bypass the nervous system when responding to stimuli, and thus attaining much faster reflex actions. And in the most basic of basic examples, let's say that you touch something hot. At that point, the receptors in your hand need to send signals to the brain, which then needs to send a signal to whatever part of your body needs to produce a reflexive response, which would usually be, take your hand off the hot thing, you idiot. Meanwhile, with Whirlwind, Killua gets to skip this middle step altogether. Instead, now when his aura encounters a stimuli, the aura itself will immediately send the right reactionary response directly to Killua's muscles. And in super basic terms, this gives Killua access to speed and agility that is only surpassed by the truly godlike figures of the Hunt Hunter world. However, as always, there is balance to be maintained, being that whilst using Whirlwind, Killua is obviously not in control of any of his functions. It's kind of like Shinnok's autopilot, where Killua just flicks a switch and hope that everything turns out for the best. Which, speaking of, there is a striking similarity between Whirlwind and Shinnok's autopilot, and it brings up the potential of Killua perhaps invoking manipulation, specifically in regards to pre-programming his aura. That is something that should not theoretically be available to Killua through transmutation, enhancement, or conjuration. However, manipulation would of course be Killua's weakest affinity, which isn't to say that he's definitely not using it. It would just make him all the more impressive if this was indeed the case. But for some more control, there is indeed a secondary application of Godspeed, which is known as Speed of Lightning, and it more or less has the same explanation as Whirlwind, except that Killua maintains his executive functions, and it is not up to the pre-programmed aura. As a result, though, Speed of Lightning is significantly slower than Whirlwind, which is strange to say because this does give Killua access to truly superhuman speed, allowing him to traverse over 40 kilometers or just under 25 miles in roughly 10 minutes, which is it's pretty fast. But just as with everything else, both applications of Godspeed rapidly deplete Killua's aura, especially the much more intensive Whirlwind function, and Killua actually found himself running out of aura when he was facing off against Yuppie during the Chimera Ant arc. Now, this is notably not the full extent of Killua's abilities, although this is the end of what can be solidly attributed to Nen use. Killua does have a greater skill set though, having already been a fully trained assassin at the dawn of Hunter x Hunter. And whilst I don't see this too often, there has been some confusion about his expanded abilities, particularly that of Rhythm Echo, which is a technique Killua uses that results in crafting a series of after images of different cadence in order to confuse and intimidate enemies. However, Killua did not know Nen when he demonstrated this, indicating that he is simply taking human actions to the absolute extreme. However, in the anime especially, it is depicted in a very similar manner to that of a Nen user, with all of the purple hues and everything. Killua also has another particularly curious ability though, which allows him to immediately transform his fingernails into claws that are as sharp as knives. And once again, he could do this prior to discovering Nen, which kind of boggles the mind a bit, because this can be explained quite simply as using really basic enhancement, and many other enhancers in the series do have similar techniques. A lot of this is probably just due to the nature of early Hunter x Hunter though. As I've explored elsewhere at great length, Hunter x Hunter is certainly not a planned series, and Togashi employs an almost whimsical style of authorship, which comes with great advantages, but also a lot of lingering oddities like this, and a fair few outright plot holes. I mean, stuff like this can also be explained as being a subconscious use of Nen, which is how most humans in this world do access their aura. So Killua could just be employing Nen use instinctively without a core understanding of what he's doing, but that is very speculative. As for what we can take as fact, Killua is a shockingly talented Nen wielder who in under 2 years pursued the art form to a level that would be unachievable in an entire lifetime for the average user. And I suppose the greatest thing is that, unlike Gon, Killua still retains the ability to go even further, and whilst we may never see this eventuality, that makes him quite a terrifying prospect for the future of the Zoldyck household. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Hunt x Hunter content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular Hunt x Hunter glory delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.